Michael Clark Rockefeller was born into a world of immense privilege and expectation on May 18, 1938. He was the fifth child of Nelson Rockefeller, a man who would serve as the governor of New York and later as vice president of the United States. More than that, Michael was a great-grandson of John D. Rockefeller, the patriarch of the legendary dynasty and America's first billionaire. This was a family that had shaped the very fabric of American industry, politics, and philanthropy. A life in the towering skyscrapers of finance or the hallowed halls of government seemed not just a possibility for young Michael, but a preordained path, a duty to his formidable lineage. His future was mapped out for him in boardrooms and political campaigns. He was raised in an environment where success was the baseline and influence was the family business. Yet, from an early age, Michael displayed a spirit that was not entirely in lockstep with the world he was born into. He was thoughtful, introspective, and possessed a curiosity that reached far beyond the confines of Wall Street or Washington, D.C. In 1960, he fulfilled a part of his family's expectations by graduating with honors in history and economics from Harvard University. This achievement, however, was merely a stepping stone, not to a corner office, but to a world that was far more ancient, mysterious, and to him, infinitely more compelling. He was not destined to follow the path of his father. While his father Nelson was a formidable political figure, he also possessed a deep and abiding passion for art, particularly what was then termed primitive art. He established the Museum of Primitive Art in New York City in 1957, a place that would become a sanctuary for Michael. It was here that the young man's own passion was kindled. He was not just an admirer, he became a student of the powerful, raw, and spiritually charged artifacts from cultures across the globe. This shared interest with his father forged a unique bond, but for Michael, it was more than a hobby. It was a calling that pulled him toward the very source of this art, to the remote corners of the earth where such objects were not just decorations, but vital parts of a living culture. This fascination with the raw, unfiltered expression of human creativity set him on a collision course with his family's world. While his brothers pursued careers in line with the Rockefeller name, Michael's heart was captured by the intricate carvings, the bold masks, and the profound stories embedded within the art of tribal peoples. He saw in these objects a truth and an authenticity that he felt was missing from his own modern, structured existence. His academic achievements at Harvard were not an end, but a means. They equipped him with the discipline and knowledge to pursue his true passion, a quest that would ultimately lead him to the dense, uncharted mangrove swamps of New Guinea, a world away from the gilded cage of his birth. In 1961, shortly after his graduation, Michael seized the opportunity to transform his academic passion into tangible experience. He joined a prestigious expedition organized by Harvard's Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology. The destination was Dutch New Guinea, a vast and largely unexplored island in the Pacific, a place that existed in the modern imagination as a land of mystery and primal cultures. The primary goal of the expedition was to film a documentary, which would later be released as Dead Birds, focusing on the Dani tribe who inhabited the island's remote highlands. These were people who lived in a near-constant state of ritualized warfare, a cycle of life and death that was both fascinating and unsettling to outsiders. Michael's official role on this expedition was that of a sound engineer. He was tasked with capturing the auditory landscape of the Dani world, their chants, their calls to battle, and the sounds of their daily lives. However, his responsibilities quickly blurred as his insatiable curiosity took over. He was not content to simply stand by and record. Armed with his still camera, he immersed himself in the community, moving beyond the role of a detached observer to become a dedicated documentarian. He spent countless hours photographing the Dani, chronicling their rituals, their social structures, and their interactions with a genuine respect and an artist's eye for detail. This first journey was a profound awakening for him. It was during the latter stages of this initial expedition that Michael had his first, transformative encounter with another of the island's peoples, the Asmat. If the Dani were a subject of intense academic interest, the Asmat were a people of legend, inhabiting the sprawling, labyrinthine swamplands of the island's southern coast. Their world was a maze of muddy rivers and dense mangrove forests, a territory that was nearly impenetrable and had kept them isolated from outside influence for centuries. Michael was immediately captivated by the sheer power and artistic brilliance of their culture, particularly their monumental wood carvings. He saw in their work a level of spiritual depth and aesthetic mastery that he had only previously seen behind museum glass. This brief encounter with the Asmat cemented Michael's life's purpose. He knew he had to return. The Dead Birds project had been an introduction, but his own quest was just beginning. He envisioned a grand project, to collect the finest examples of Asmat art, not merely as trophies, but as vital cultural documents to be preserved and studied at his father's museum in New York. He believed that by bringing these powerful objects to the Western world, he could build a bridge of understanding and showcase the profound artistic achievements of a people who were largely misunderstood and often feared. His first expedition had given him a glimpse. His second would be a total immersion. The Asmat people, whom Michael had become so determined to study, lived in a world dictated by a complex and often brutal cosmology. They were not simply inhabitants of the swamp, they were an extension of it. Their spiritual beliefs were deeply intertwined with their environment and a cycle of life, death, and reciprocity. They were renowned as fierce warriors and headhunters, but these practices were not born of simple aggression. For the Asmat, headhunting was a necessary ritual, a way to restore spiritual balance to their community. They believed that when a person died, their spirit lingered, causing disharmony until their death was avenged. A life had to be taken to appease the ancestral spirits and allow the dead to pass peacefully into the next realm. This belief system was the driving force behind their extraordinary artistic tradition. The Asmat were master woodcarvers, and their creations were not mere decorations but conduits to the spiritual world. They held a creation myth that the first humans were carved from wood and brought to life by the rhythm of a drum. Thus, wood carving was a sacred act, a reenactment of creation itself. The most spectacular of these carvings were the Bisji poles. These were immense, intricately carved monuments, sometimes reaching heights of over 20 feet, crafted from a single mangrove tree. Each figure carved into the pole represented an ancestor whose death had yet to be avenged, their spirits crying out for balance through the wood. Michael Rockefeller was particularly mesmerized by the Bisji poles. He saw them as the ultimate expression of Asmat art and spirituality, a powerful fusion of aesthetic beauty and ritualistic purpose. During his first brief visit, he had attempted to acquire one of these sacred artifacts for his father's museum, but had been unsuccessful. The poles were not commodities to be bought or sold. They were central to the spiritual life of the village. They were erected as part of a great feast, a prelude to a headhunting raid that would avenge the names carved into the pole. Once the raid was complete and balance was restored, the poles were left in the sago palm groves to decay, their purpose fulfilled, their energy returning to the earth. Understanding this context was crucial to Michael's quest. He was not just a collector seeking exotic objects, he was an ethnographer trying to grasp the soul of a people through their most sacred creations. He knew that to acquire a Bisji pole, he would need more than just trade goods. He would need to build trust, to navigate a complex web of social obligations, and to understand the deep-seated beliefs that gave these carvings their power. His desire to possess these objects was inextricably linked to his desire to understand the people who made them, a pursuit that would lead him deeper into their world than any outsider had gone before. In the autumn of 1961, driven by his singular obsession, Michael Rockefeller embarked on his second and final expedition to New Guinea. This time he was not part of a larger team, he was leading his own venture. He was accompanied by René Wassing, a Dutch anthropologist who shared his interest in Asmat culture and could help him navigate the complexities of the region. They also hired two local Asmat men, Simon and Leo, to serve as guides and interpreters, crucial intermediaries in their interactions with the various villages scattered throughout the swamp. Michael arrived well prepared, his boat laden with valuable trade goods, steel axes, fishing line, and tobacco, items he hoped to barter for the unique art he so desperately sought. The expedition began with a series of successful encounters. Michael and Wassing traveled from village to village along the winding rivers, slowly and carefully negotiating for artifacts. Michael, with his camera and notebooks, meticulously documented each piece he acquired, recording its story and the name of its creator. He was in his element, a young man bridging two vastly different worlds, fulfilling the dream that had taken root within him at his father's museum. He was succeeding in his mission, amassing a collection that was unprecedented in its scope and quality. But the Asmat coast was a treacherous and unpredictable place, and the very environment that had shaped its people was about to turn on the visitors. On November 17, 1961, the small expedition was navigating the coastal waters near the mouth of the Islandan River. They were in a heavily loaded 12-meter catamaran, essentially two dugout canoes lashed together with a platform and an outboard motor. This vessel, though practical for river travel, was not designed for the volatile conditions of the open Arafura Sea. Without warning, a sudden squall blew in, churning the shallow coastal waters into a frenzy. A large, powerful wave slammed into their makeshift boat, swamping the craft and stalling their single precious engine. They were adrift, at the mercy of the tides and the relentless sea. The situation was dire. They were miles from the nearest known settlement, tossed about by the waves in a region infamous for its strong currents and saltwater crocodiles. As the hours passed, Michael and Renee clung to their swamped and crippled vessel, while their two guides, Simon and Leo, made a courageous decision. Being strong swimmers and familiar with the local waters, they chose to swim for the distant shore, which they estimated to be about a kilometer away, to seek help. As the two men disappeared into the murky water, Michael and Renee were left alone, drifting farther out to sea, their hopes for rescue dwindling with the fading light of day. For what must have felt like an eternity, Michael Rockefeller and Renee Wassing remained with their overturned boat. They clung to the wreckage, battered by the waves and exposed to the elements, as the vessel was pulled steadily away from the coastline by the powerful currents of the Arafura Sea. The sun beat down on them and the night brought a chilling cold. All through the next day they scanned the empty horizon, hoping to see the telltale sign of a rescue party, a boat sent by their guides, Simon and Leo. But the hours stretched on, and no help arrived. The hope that had sustained them began to fray, replaced by the grim reality of their situation. As another wave crashed over them, further capsizing their vessel, a sense of desperation began to set in. Michael, ever the man of action, grew increasingly restless. He was a strong swimmer and a confident young man, accustomed to taking charge of his own destiny. He watched the distant, blurry line of the shore, which he estimated to be somewhere between 8 and 16 kilometers away, a formidable but, in his mind, achievable distance. He began to formulate a plan, a desperate gamble to save himself and his companion. He believed that waiting for a rescue that might never come was a greater risk than taking his chances with the sea. Gathering his resolve, Michael made his decision. He located 2 empty gasoline cans from their supplies, intending to lash them together to use as a makeshift flotation device. He explained his plan to Wassing, who was older and less physically confident, and who urged him to stay with the boat. Wassing argued that their best chance was to be spotted by a search plane, and that striking out on his own was suicide. But Michael's mind was made up. He was convinced that he could make it to land and summon help. His last recorded words, spoken to the worried anthropologist, were filled with the characteristic confidence of his youth. "I think I can make it." With that, Michael Rockefeller stripped down to his underwear, secured the gasoline cans and slipped into the warm brown water of the Arafura Sea. Wassing watched as his young companion began the long, arduous swim toward the distant shore, a small, determined figure slowly disappearing into the vastness of the ocean. It was the morning of November 19, 1961. This was the last time any known witness would see Michael Rockefeller alive. The young heir, who had turned his back on a world of predictable comfort, was now battling for his life against the raw, untamable power of nature he had so longed to understand. More than 12 excruciating hours after Michael had swum away, a Dutch patrol plane finally spotted the wreckage of the catamaran. The pilot circled overhead and soon a rescue boat was dispatched, pulling a weary and exhausted Renee Wassing from the sea. It was later revealed that the 2 guides, Simon and Leo, had indeed made it to shore and had successfully summoned help, though it had taken much longer than anticipated for the alert to reach the proper authorities. Wassing recounted the harrowing story of their capsizing and Michael's fateful decision to swim for help. Immediately, one of the most extensive and highly publicized search and rescue operations of the era was launched to find the missing scion. The Rockefeller name carried immense weight, and no expense was spared. The Dutch government, which still administered the territory, deployed ships, helicopters, and patrol planes to scour the coastline and the surrounding sea. Nelson Rockefeller, frantic with worry, flew to New Guinea with Michael's twin sister Mary to personally oversee and participate in the search for his son. The world watched as the full might of modern resources was brought to bear on the ancient landscape. For 2 agonizing weeks, they searched. They combed the beaches, flew low over the dense mangrove canopy, and interviewed villagers along the coast, hoping for any news, any sign of the young American. Despite the massive scale of the operation, the search yielded almost nothing. The only trace of Michael ever found was one of the red gasoline cans he had used for flotation, discovered washed up on the shore some distance from where he was last seen. There were no footprints, no remnants of clothing, no credible sightings. The vast impenetrable swamp seemed to have simply swallowed him whole, leaving no clue as to his fate. The local environment, with its powerful currents, shark-infested waters and saltwater crocodiles, presented a host of plausible, tragic explanations. The odds of a lone swimmer surviving such an ordeal were infinitesimally small. After 2 weeks of fruitless searching, the Dutch Interior Minister made a somber announcement on November 28, 1961. With no new leads and the chances of survival reduced to 0, he declared that there was no longer any hope of finding Michael Rockefeller alive. The official search was called off. Nelson Rockefeller and his daughter returned to the United States heartbroken. 3 years later, in 1964, Michael Rockefeller was legally declared dead by his family. The official cause of death was listed as drowning at sea. For the world, and for the Rockefeller family, this became the accepted narrative. A tragic accident, a brave but foolish gamble that had ended in the unforgiving waters off the coast of New Guinea. While the official story of Michael's drowning was accepted by the world at large, whispers of a much darker fate began to circulate among those who knew the Asmat region well. These rumors were rooted in a specific and violent incident that had occurred nearly 4 years prior to Michael's disappearance. In January 1958, a Dutch colonial patrol, led by a man named Max Lapra, had a deadly confrontation with warriors from the village of Otsianep, one of the most powerful and feared Asmat communities in the area. The clash resulted in the Dutch patrol opening fire, killing 5 of the village's most respected leaders. This event was a deep wound in the psyche of the Otsianep people. This massacre was more than just a violent episode, it was a profound disruption of the spiritual world for the Asmat. According to their system of belief, which demanded reciprocity and balance, the souls of the 5 murdered leaders could not rest. Their deaths, caused by outsiders from the white tribe, created a spiritual debt that had to be paid. To restore harmony and appease the vengeful spirits, a retaliatory killing was not just likely, it was a sacred obligation. The men of Otsianep were now bound by tradition to seek a victim from the same tribe as the Dutch patrol, a white man, to balance the scales. This simmering need for revenge became a key element in an alternative theory about Michael's fate. The theory posits that Michael Rockefeller, exhausted from his long swim, did not drown in the sea but successfully reached the shore. Tragically, the stretch of coastline he washed up on was the territory controlled by the village of Otsianep. The warriors, who had been waiting for nearly 4 years for an opportunity to fulfill their duty, would have seen his arrival not as a random accident, but as a form of divine providence. Here was a white man, delivered to them by the sea, a perfect candidate to pay the blood debt for their slain leaders. In this scenario, Michael was not just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had stumbled into the final act of a drama that had begun long before he ever set foot in New Guinea. This version of events was pieced together from stories heard by 2 Dutch missionaries who had lived and worked in the Asmat region for years. They had built relationships with the local people and heard them speak of killing a white man around the same time Michael had vanished. One of the missionaries, Father Cornelius van Kessel, compiled a detailed report based on these accounts, suggesting that the victim was indeed Rockefeller. He sent this report to his superiors and to Dutch colonial authorities, but it was allegedly suppressed. The government, on the verge of handing over control of the territory to Indonesia, wanted to avoid a politically explosive scandal involving the death of a prominent American at the hands of its subjects. The official story of drowning never entirely silenced the rumors, and the mystery of Michael Rockefeller's disappearance continued to fascinate journalists and adventurers. In 1969, an American editor named Milt Mocklin traveled to New Guinea, spurred on by a rumor that Michael was still alive. Living as a captive, or having assimilated into one of the tribes. Mocklin found no evidence to support the idea that Rockefeller was living, but his investigation did unearth the details of the 1958 Otsianep massacre. He concluded that Michael had most likely been the victim of a revenge killing, a tragic case of being the wrong man in the wrong place. He documented his journey in his book, The Search for Michael Rockefeller. Decades later, Mocklin's story took an unexpected turn. When reviewing forgotten footage from his 1969 trip, researchers noticed a startling image. Amidst a group of Asmat warriors paddling a war canoe, there appeared to be a light-skinned, bearded man who bore a resemblance to Michael. This discovery briefly reignited the theory that he had gone native, assimilating into the tribe. However, this photographic evidence was highly ambiguous. Anthropologists pointed out that the man could have been another tribe member with albinism, a condition not unknown in the region. The tantalizing clue ultimately led to another dead end, adding yet another layer of myth to the enduring story. The most compelling evidence for the revenge theory would not emerge until more than 50 years after Michael's disappearance. In 2012, National Geographic journalist Carl Hoffman traveled to the Asmat region, determined to uncover the truth. Using a skilled interpreter and spending months living among the people of Otsianep, Hoffman managed to gain their trust. In a series of carefully navigated conversations, a village elder finally recounted the story that had been passed down through generations. He described how, about a half-century earlier, warriors had found a white man, tired and with eyes like a crocodile, floating toward their shore with 2 gasoline cans. The elder's account was chillingly specific. He told Hoffman that the warriors took the man ashore, speared him, and killed him. They then performed the sacred rituals of headhunting and cannibalism on his body, believing that by consuming parts of him, they would absorb his power and finally restore the spiritual balance that had been shattered by the Dutch patrol in 1958. Hoffman's investigation didn't stop there. He later traveled to the Netherlands and after a persistent search located the suppressed missionary reports in the Dutch government archives. These documents corroborated the stories he had heard in Otsianep, providing a powerful written record that supported the theory of a revenge killing. Hoffman detailed his extensive findings in his explosive 2014 book, Savage Harvest. Carl Hoffman's meticulous research and the publication of Savage Harvest presented the most detailed and plausible explanation for Michael Rockefeller's fate to date. The combination of first-hand testimony from the descendants of the Otsianep warriors and the discovery of long-suppressed government documents created a powerful narrative. It painted a picture not of a simple drowning, but of a complex cultural collision, where a young man's quest for art and adventure ran headlong into an ancient cycle of violence and spiritual retribution. Hoffman's work strongly suggests that Michael did make it to shore, only to meet a brutal end at the hands of men acting on a sacred duty. Despite the strength of this circumstantial evidence, the mystery of Michael Rockefeller is not officially solved and likely never will be. The critical element that is missing is definitive physical proof. No remains have ever been recovered and no DNA evidence has ever been found to irrefutably link Michael to the events described by the villagers of Otsianep. Without a body or a tangible artifact from the scene, the account remains a compelling theory rather than a proven fact. The story relies on oral histories passed down through generations and on documents written by others, leaving a small but persistent sliver of doubt. For their part, the Rockefeller family has never publicly acknowledged the revenge theory. They continue to adhere to the official story that Michael tragically drowned at sea on November 19, 1961. This position is understandable, offering a degree of closure and avoiding the more gruesome and complicated narrative of his murder and ritual cannibalism. The official declaration of death by drowning closes the book on a painful chapter in their family's history in a way that the alternative theory cannot. The art that Michael collected on his final journey is now housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, a testament to his passion and a somber memorial to his quest. Ultimately, the story of Michael Rockefeller endures precisely because it remains unsolved. It is a modern myth that encapsulates the clash of civilizations, the allure of the unknown, and the tragic consequences of misunderstanding. Was he a victim of the unforgiving sea, or of a culture he sought to understand but could not escape? The question hangs in the humid air of the Asmat swamps, a place that guards its secrets well. The young heir who ventured into a world of primal art in search of authenticity, found it perhaps in the most final and terrifying way imaginable, leaving behind a legacy as mysterious and profound as the artifacts he so dearly loved.